is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. A constitutional crisis for the EU. The European Parliament censures Hungary over its controversial new law banning the depiction or promotion of homosexuality in schools.
Our other headlines: double jabbed and ready to roam. UK residents arriving back in England won't need to quarantine if they've had 2 vaccines.
Automaker Stellantis accelerates towards electric vehicles, announcing a $35 billion investment.
This transformation period is a wonderful opportunity to reset the clock and start a new race.
Plus, spectators are barred from the Tokyo Olympics as the city declares a coronavirus emergency. And
England fans party after an historic win sends their team into the final of Euro 2020. The European Parliament has called for urgent legal action against Hungary. It's adopted a resolution that Hungary has broken EU law. The vote came after Budapest rejected EU demands that it repeal legislation banning LGBT education in schools. Well, Penelope Liège is in Budapest for us. So, Penny, what more can you tell us?
Well, the European Parliament has condemned in the strongest possible terms this recent anti-LGBTQI law from Hungary. They've also said that MEPs denounce the dismantling of democracy in the country and issues around rule of law. So there are a number of issues being covered, but the main one, this resolution has been adopted to take action against Hungarian lawmakers in regards to the anti-LGBT law. It was adopted 459 for, 147 against, with 58 MEPs abstaining from that vote. So very strong support for action to be taken against Hungary. Well, what happens next? There is the call for the Commission and for Member States to bring Hungary before the European Court of Justice and for interim measures and infringement measures to be brought forward more quickly so that action can be taken in regards to this law, which bans those under the age of 18 from accessing any display or promotion of homosexuality or gender change issues, which affects what is taught in schools and also what is shown in the media. Now, there are many critics of this law from the EU and from within Hungary. One of the other issues is that it was tacked onto a pedophilia bill, conflating homosexuality with child abuse issues. So very big issues being tackled. And within Hungary, while the government is not backing down, supporters of the LGBT community are still out in force. Today we saw them flying a rainbow balloon in front of Hungarian Parliament. Take a look.
It's a law that's been slammed by human rights groups and political leaders, banning the display and promotion of homosexuality and gender change through schools and the media. The leader of the European Commission labelled it a disgrace, promising to use all tools available to force Hungary to repeal the law. But Viktor Orban's government remains defiant.
The European Parliament and the European Commission want LGBTQ activists and organizations to be allowed into kindergartens and schools. Hungary doesn't want this. The debate is about who decides how we educate our children.
For those fighting for change within Hungary, action from the European Parliament is vital.
I think the only way that Orban and the government recognizes that the anti-LGBT attack that they have been doing for the past 1.5 years has to stop is if the EU intervenes. And most importantly, if they actually say that they will cut the financial support that Hungary is receiving from the EU.
While the law has come into force, their fight is far from over.
Hungary's LGBT community is not giving up. As well as public displays like this, one support group is launching a website to provide LGBT education for high school students.
The Hatter Society, one of Hungary's oldest non-profit groups, worries young people are more likely to be bullied at school and the law will take a psychological toll. So even with action from the EU, there's concerns that damage to the mental health of the LGBT community has already been done.
So, as well as those calls we've heard from the MEPs, the resolution adopted to bring Hungary to the European Court of Justice and take action in regards to this legislation, we could also see funds from the EU being frozen. There is going to be more of an investigation looking into certain concerns around the way Hungary will use that COVID recovery fund and whether it can be blocked accessing that for breaching the rule of law. Also, MEPs are urging there to be further in-depth investigations into who is financing anti-LGBT campaigns across Europe because of the very close similarities between this legislation that has been brought forward in Hungary and a 2013 law known as the anti-LGBT propaganda law that came forward in Russia. So there's certainly a lot more to come on this story, Robin. We'll keep you posted.
Penelope Liesch, thank you very much.
Meanwhile, the future relationship of Europe and China has been under discussion. China's foreign minister has been meeting his European counterpart via video link. Wang Yi emphasized the importance of cooperation between the two sides.
China and the EU have a comprehensive strategic partnership, and we are two independent forces in the world. So we believe China and the EU have a responsibility to maintain dialogue and cooperation in our relations. We also have an obligation to adhere to mutual benefit. We are more confident that we can jointly contribute to addressing global challenges.
Well, our correspondent Tony Waterman has been following that meeting. So a message of cooperation from Wang Yi. Tell us more about his meeting with EU counterpart Joseph Borrell.
Well, Jamie, this was a meeting about taking stock of the EU-China relationship, also looking at areas, as you mentioned, of cooperation. The relationship has become strained over the past couple of years, but both China and the European Union know that they need to work together if they are going to solve some of the world's most pressing issues, things like climate change in particular, and also the pandemic, and also less pressing issues like when it comes to sports and finance. So even amid differences, they are very much searching for areas of cooperation. And this talks that took place today coming just a couple of days after the Chinese President Xi Jinping held a video conference call with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, also the French President Emmanuel Macron. And according to the readout from the Chinese side of that meeting, both the European leaders expressed an interest and support for reviving what is now a very much stalled investment deal between the EU and China. That was agreed to in principle back in December, but has since come up against a wall in the European Parliament. So there is some perhaps areas where they are looking to cooperate, but really right now it looks like climate change is the biggest area.
Tony, this wasn't the only China-EU meeting today.
No, it wasn't. There was also a forum that took place between Chinese and European financial leaders. What they are specifically looking for are ways to leverage the huge financial power, the financial prowess that the EU and China have to fight climate change. Take a listen to what the president of the Bank of China had to say during that forum.
A robust partnership between China and the EU will help translate our complementary leverages in green economy into a promising future. In the cooperation on green economy, the financial sector will no doubt play an important role.
He really sees three main areas where the financial sector can be utilized. He says that more funding can go into these sectors that promote low carbon industries, so energy and new technologies. He says that China has already invested trillions of dollars in this effort, and that this is how they're going to get to that target of being carbon neutral by 2060, but also hitting that peak of carbon in 2030. He also said that there could perhaps be more connectivity when it comes to the carbon markets. Europe is really a global leader in this stage. It is not only the world's first, but also has the largest emissions trading system. And China right now is really working towards launching a national carbon market. So there is the opportunity here for the exchange of information, the exchange of expertise. He also said that China and the EU could work together when it comes to setting the global standard for green bonds and green financing. Earlier this week, the EU put forward a proposal for a new green bond standard that would help really funnel money into these environmentally friendly projects. The challenge, of course, is that there could be a lot of greenwashing taking place. Projects and companies that say they're better for the environment than they actually are. And this is a market right now that is really booming. The green bond market is $1 trillion market, and it has a lot of room to grow right now. So they really want to make sure that where that money is going is actually going to lead them to hitting their climate targets. For the EU, of course, that is being climate neutral by 2050. So there are disagreements, of course, but there are many areas for cooperation as well.
Tony Waterman in Brussels, thank you very much.
Taking holidays, reuniting families and helping businesses. That's what the UK's Transport Minister said was important as he announced changes to international travel restrictions for those returning to England. Let's talk now to our correspondent Andrew Wilson. So, Andrew, what's the latest on this?
Well, there's lots of cheers from the travel industry, certainly from this announcement from the Transport Minister Grant Shapps today. Essentially, it's about the amber list. The amber list is the middle of the three in the traffic light system, and most of the countries that Britons travel to are on that list. Germany, France, Italy, Russia, United States. They're all amber list countries. And at the moment, if you travel to those, which the government recommends you shouldn't, you have to take a PCR test before you go, and you have to come back and quarantine for 10 days at home and take 2 more PCR tests, one on the 2nd and one on the 8th day after your return. As of 19th of July, that will no longer be necessary. Anyone who's had 2 jabs, at least 14 days after that, they are now considered clean to go miss out the quarantine and miss out the 2nd PCR test. They've still got to take the one on the day 2 when they come back. So that makes life considerably easier. Also, under 18s are also exempt from quarantine. Also important, the government is now going to lift its guidance that you shouldn't travel to amber list countries. The result has already been seen in the bookings. Travel agencies are reporting people booking dates as of 19th onwards like crazy. The prices are already going up quite steeply as people are catching on and seizing their chance for a bit of summer sun. This was the Transport Secretary in the House of Commons today.
I can confirm today that from the 19th of July, UK residents who are fully vaccinated through the UK vaccine rollout will no longer have to self-isolate when they return to England. They'll still be required to take a test 3 days before returning, the pre-departure test demonstrating they're negative before they travel, and a PCR test on or before day 2.
So, Andrew, you said there would be cheers from the travel industry over this. How important is it for them?
Well, of course, these are the industries that are struggling, the airline industry, the travel industry, the airport industry. So all of those are saying this is a great step forward, but there are a lot of problems in the details. The big picture hasn't really been fixed yet. That's because this new ruling refers only to UK citizens coming back to the UK. What the airlines are saying is we need to have the same restrictions lifted for foreigners coming into the UK. From the United States, that's still being negotiated. From parts of Europe, that's still being negotiated. Also, the difficulties will be not so much at the arrivals. We know already that Heathrow is trialling these arrival procedures. It's checking in at the other end. You've got to get your tests sorted out. There might be delays there, so that needs to be sorted out. What about travel insurance? What about masks? These are the kind of questions people are asking. And in the background, of course, there's still this rather bleak picture of the Delta variant making its way through Europe. To give you an example, on the Test and Trace NHS app at the end of last week, 356,000 alerts were issued. But the week before, it was only 219,000. So things are already getting worse as far as cases of the Delta variant. And also, bear in mind that they are going to review the countries on the amber list on the 15th of July, which could be good news. Some of those could become green countries. But at any time, the government can take an amber list country and move it to red, which would lead to tourists perhaps being trapped in a country like Portugal or Italy in the way they were last time when Portugal and Spain were moved to amber colour before. So there's still plenty of concern. However, half the country, looks like it wants to go on holiday. I would suspect that another half of the country is staying well out of it and sticking to the original idea of staying at home this summer.
Andrew Wilson, good to talk to you. Thank you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, why the pandemic has had a devastating impact on the fight against human trafficking.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire. To bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe, live from London. Just a reminder for you that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Stellantis is investing more than $35 billion electrifying its vehicles over the next 5 years. The world's 4th largest automaker, formed this year by the merger of France's PSA Group and Fiat Chrysler, says it'll release a range of cars that can drive up to 800 kilometers on a single charge. It also plans to open 5 battery factories across Europe and the United States by the end of the decade.
In Europe, after France and Germany, we have now agreed with the Italian government on the support to transform our powertrain plant in Termoli. And this plant will be transformed into the 3rd gigafactory that we will have in the European continent. As you know, at Stellantis, we love to compete. This transformation period is a wonderful opportunity to reset the clock and start a new race.
Well, the group, whose 14 brands include Jeep, Peugeot and Vauxhall, is targeting more than 70% of European sales to be low-emission vehicles, either battery or hybrid, by the year 2030. Going green is obviously the future of motoring, and there's rather a lot of competition for that business. Last week, the French rival Renault announced that 90% of its main brand models will be all electric by 2030. Previously, it had included hybrids in that target. And what about Volkswagen, the world's second biggest automaker? Will they expect fully electric vehicles to account for more than 70% of its total European sales by 2030, compared with a previous target of 35%? Well, let's talk to Jim Saker, the director of the Centre for Automotive Management at Loughborough University in the UK. Jim, what do you make of this strategy?
I think it makes sense for Stellantis. It brings them into the same ballpark figures that Volkswagen are investing. They're investing 35 billion euros, and Ford are investing 30 billion euros to bring them up to speed when it comes to the electric market. So it puts Stellantis as a player within this market going forward, and it makes logical sense. It's interesting for Stellantis because obviously PSA have been investing in electric for a number of years, whereas FCA, part of the obviously PSA-FCA combine, have had to get around that the EU requirements by spending millions of euros on Tesla credits, carbon credits. So basically, they've been paying Tesla to get around the EU requirements. So it's a big shift for FCA, less of a big shift for PSA.
And other car makers, as you suggest, notably Tesla, are so far ahead. Can Stellantis really catch them up and catch them up quickly?
Yeah, but they're doing okay. If you looked at the figures for January 21, Volkswagen were the major electric car sales in Europe, followed by Stellantis. Tesla had domination. They had domination in sort of 2019, and they were number one and had 30% of the market. But that market is now becoming increasingly more competitive, with obviously Renault, Nissan, and Mitsubishi, Hyundai, and Kia all playing in this same area. So it's definitely a more competitive market.
Well, where will they sit in that crowded market? Because Tesla is presumably the premium product, kind of at the top of it. China, I'm guessing, is going to drive the price point of the cheaper models. So where do they sit?
I think they sit in this mainstream alongside Ford, Renault, Nissan, those type of players. And there is a market for that, because one of the things that came out today was that they were looking very much more for affordability. That so far at the moment, the expense of an electric car is higher than that of an internal combustion engine. And therefore, unless you've got some sort of government subsidy happening at the same time, then people are not that engaged with the process as they would do if it was more competitively priced.
And I want to ask you about the logistics of all of this and how it'll work. Can a group of older, established car companies spread out in factories all over Europe really be competitive if they're shipping batteries, which are pretty heavy, thousands of miles to different plants across Europe?
Well, I think that's the reason why they're talking about building battery manufacturing in Europe and in the US. There is a need to actually have a local supplier, because obviously it is very much more expensive to ship stuff around as you describe it. And so therefore their investment, and the same with Nissan up in the north of England, is to actually have battery manufacture in or close to the actual production lines.
And these big car companies are being showered with state or whatever you want to call it, public money to either retain them or expand them. That's rather controversial, isn't it?
I think it's almost inevitable, that if you want, especially in the UK, if you want to keep manufacturing happening outside of the EU, then the 10 million that the government are helping subsidise the Stellantis investment in Ellesmere Port, that's almost going to be the norm. And as Tavares said regarding the Italian government, there will be investment coming in from those governments because they have a commitment to zero carbon emissions, and therefore they need to be seen to be playing their part within this.
Jim Saker at Loughborough University, thank you very much for talking to us.
Pleasure.
Volkswagen and BMW have been fined $1 billion for breaching European Union antitrust rules. The European Commission says they colluded to restrict the use of emissions cleaning technology that they developed. Under a settlement, Volkswagen will pay a fine of almost $600 million and BMW will pay over $400 million. Daimler, which is also part of the cartel, escaped a fine after revealing its existence. 2 lawsuits have been filed by US shareholders against Chinese ride-hailing app DiDi Global. A crackdown by regulators caused its share price to plunge. The lawsuits come just a week after DiDi's debut on the New York Stock Exchange. The company lost billions in market value after Beijing ordered smartphone app stores to remove it from their platforms. Meanwhile, Chinese medical data group LinkDoc Technology is reportedly shelving plans for an IPO on US markets. It comes after China's cybersecurity regulator toughened its approach to oversight. It's thought LinkDoc's IPO could have raised over $200 million. A small drawing of a bear's head by Leonardo da Vinci is tipped to sell for over $16 million at an auction underway in London. The drawing, only 3 inches square, is one of a handful of works by the Italian master still in private hands.
The European Central Bank has announced a major change that means record low interest rates could be here to stay. For the first time in 2 decades, the central bank has reviewed its own monetary policy, with 25 national Eurozone banks signing off. There's also a push for using the bank's power to enact meaningful action on climate change. Ryan Thompson reports from Frankfurt.
The highlight of Thursday's announcement is a major change to inflation policy by the European Central Bank. The target remains at 2%, but now the central bank says it will tolerate temporarily exceeding that when needed. This will give policymakers much more flexibility, and in the eyes of investors, it will keep key interest rates at record lows. The ECB is only a 23-year-old institution, but this is the first time it's undergone a comprehensive review of its own monetary policy since 2003, so pre-pandemic and pre-European debt crisis. Many of the announcements signal the conservative rules that the institution founded itself on are loosening up finally. No longer will policymakers have to keep inflation right below the margin of 2%. ECB chief Christine Lagarde wanted to soften the rules when she took over from Mario Draghi in 2019. She now says it's a strong foundation that will guide the bank.
We went from below but close to 2% to 2%. It is simple to communicate, it is solid, it is well accepted in the international economic community, and it's a good balancing act between having enough room to maneuver in order to resist and fight disinflation and avoiding the welfare cost of having too high inflation.
And another key platform of Lagarde's tenure has been a commitment to using the bank's power to meet some climate goals, which was also part of the review. From now on, the ECB will tackle climate change risks by shifting asset purchasing away from heavy carbon-emitting companies. There's also a climate stress test planned for the Eurosystem balance sheet, which will start as soon as next year. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
Artificial intelligence has come to Shanghai. The city is hosting the 2021 World Artificial Intelligence Conference. Hundreds of developers are attending, with many debuting their latest designs. CGTN's Chen Tong reports.
This sky is expected to play an important role in the upcoming Winter Olympics in Beijing. It can automatically detect whether the participants are eligible to enter the resort, aiming to reduce labor costs.
In the resort, it can go down to like minus 40 degrees. So it's almost impossible for people to cover that big area. So this device can handle the extreme weather, like cold, wind, and snow, and all kinds of conditions. Basically, it can take over a lot of human efforts.
AI is also being applied to other areas such as education, healthcare, automobiles, and manufacturing. And these all feature at the event.
As of the end of 2020, there are more than 1,100 companies in Shanghai dedicated to AI developments. Total industrial value recorded a 50% increase last year despite the epidemic. AI developers are showing confidence in the industry.
Much more confidence here. In our country, we have a lot of people here, and every day we create so many data here. And we can use this data to train our business model and use this data to train the deep learning models. Okay, use these models, we can create so many applications and products to help our business more understand people.
This year marks the 4th that Shanghai has held the World AI Conference. In addition to the main exhibition, forums on topics ranging from AI professionals and chips to 5G applications are also expected at the conference. The event will last until Saturday. Chen Tong, CGTN, Shanghai.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, a ban on fans and a COVID emergency for Tokyo 2020. We'll assess the impact on the event and the athletes taking part.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time has come, and this idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. A constitutional crisis for the EU. The European Parliament censures Hungary over its controversial new law banning the depiction or promotion of homosexuality in schools.
Double jabbed and ready to roam. UK residents arriving back in England won't need to quarantine if they've had 2 vaccines.
And the automaker Stellantis accelerates towards electric vehicles, announcing a $35 billion investment.
There will be no spectators at the Tokyo Olympics. The decision comes after a state of emergency was declared in the Japanese capital. COVID-19 numbers are rising in Japan, with the Games just a fortnight away. Limited numbers of spectators may still be allowed at some Olympic venues outside of Tokyo, depending on local restrictions. Medical experts have been saying that empty stadiums are the safest way to prevent the virus spreading. Well, somebody who will be there is Paul Scott, who's a sports journalist. He'll be travelling to Tokyo to cover the Olympics. Good to have you on the show, Paul. So we now know there will be no spectators at the Games. Just how much will those empty stadiums affect the atmosphere and the athletes taking part?
Well, it's obviously going to be a huge disappointment for not just the locals in Tokyo, but sports fans around the world. We knew several months ago that overseas spectators weren't going to be allowed into Tokyo, but it now looks almost certain that there's not going to be any Japanese residents allowed either. So it's a huge blow for local fans and international sports fans. It's a huge blow as well, let's not forget, for the organisers, because those tickets, well, a lot of money is generated when they sell them, a lot of merchandise is sold, so it's going to be a huge financial hit for the organising committee and the International Olympic Committee. And of course, it is a huge blow for the athletes as well. But most of the athletes, I think, will be coming to Tokyo looking to compete for medals. Certainly the elite athletes who are medal contenders will be looking at this still as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to try and get their hands on an Olympic medal. Yes, they'll be disappointed that there won't be spectators there, but this still represents the pinnacle of their career. So I think it's disappointment for those athletes, but it's going to be an Olympic Games that's going to look and feel very, very different, that's for sure. An Olympic Games that is made solely for TV.
So no spectators in stadiums, but journalists will be there, including you. Tell us about the COVID-19 safety measures that will be in place.
Well, organisers are perhaps rightly very concerned about the influx of people coming from all four corners of the globe to Japan for the Games, because these Olympic Games are not popular with the Japanese public. A recent poll suggested 80% of the Japanese public do not want these Games to go ahead. So the organising committee and the International Olympic Committee simply can't afford to allow this influx of broadcasters and athletes and sponsors to lead to a spike in cases in Japan. So they're being ultra cautious. Personally, we have to do what's known as a 14-day soft quarantine. We have to do numerous COVID tests prior to flying, tested at the airport upon arrival, shipped directly to our hotel, and then we're not allowed to leave for 14 days. Our hotel room, unless we're going to the sports venue, that has to be pre-arranged with the organising committee. You're not allowed to go for a walk, you're not allowed to go to restaurants, and with the state of emergency that's been declared in Tokyo as well, they're trying to keep anyone who's part of the Olympic bubble completely separate, certainly for the first 14 days, from the people of Tokyo, because as I mentioned, the big concern is really that that influx of people from overseas could lead to a spike in cases.
And looking at sport more generally, we're seeing the return of crowds in some of them, but COVID is still having an effect. We've seen entire squads being changed last minute in both rugby and cricket.
Yeah, I think this is going to be the way it is, certainly when you're looking at international sports over the next few months. Obviously, domestically here in the UK, there is a real hope and expectation that come next winter, the start of the football season in August, that things might look a bit more normal. But when you're factoring overseas travel, and each separate country, each individual country are going to have different rules, different regulations, different restrictions. We've seen it, of course, you mentioned the cricket, the entire one-day international squad had to be changed at the last minute because 3 players and 4 of England's management team tested positive for COVID. Ashley Giles, who's a bigwig at the ECB, saying the whole summer of cricket hangs by a thread. We saw, of course, the British Lions, their tour of South Africa. They're going to be playing the same opponent twice in 4 days because their scheduled opponent has been struck down by COVID. And, of course, Johanna Konta, the British tennis player, missed Wimbledon this year because one of her entourage tested positive and she was deemed to be a close contact. So this is, I think, something, certainly when it comes to international sporting competition, we're going to have to get used to, certainly for the next few months or so.
Just returning then to Tokyo 2020, you hear a lot in sport about the home advantage, having your home fans there to support you. Athletes are simply going to find it much harder to achieve those personal bests that you mentioned, aren't they?
Of course, I think when you think of the Olympic Games, some of the iconic moments, it's sports that don't usually get the focus of attention. They're not normally in the spotlight, and yet armchair sports fans, people who aren't even sports fans, can come together and get behind something that they won't be watching for 4 years between the Olympic Games. And those athletes, it is the pinnacle of their career. It's an opportunity for them to showcase their skills and their talents and everything that they've been working for and all the sacrifices they've made in front of a live audience. You think of the iconic moment of the Olympic Games, it's usually the 100 metres, the hush of the crowd before the bang of the gun. We're not going to have any of that this year, and I think it's going to be a real test between those athletes. It's a real leveller in many respects that the crowds won't be there.
Paul Scott, thanks very much indeed for talking to us today.
England are through to the final of Euro 2020, their first major men's football final in 55 years. They beat Denmark 2-1 amid a frenzied atmosphere at Wembley Stadium, and all eyes now turn to Sunday and their opponents, Italy. Our correspondent Guy Henderson is at Wembley for us. Guy, an historic moment for England and huge celebrations over this achievement so far.
Yeah, it was a narrative-shattering evening, Jamie, for both sides, really, because, of course, for Danish fans, well, their side was supposed to continue its fairy tale journey all the way to the final after being galvanised from the tragic on-pitch collapse of their teammate Christian Eriksen in the group stages of this competition. As for this England side, well, don't we all know that England sides are often packed with all this talent, and yet, of course, they never make it to the finals of major competitions, right? And yet, they did this time, sending the country into a frenzy.
It was a moment England fans will remember for a lifetime. Finally, a semi-final victory at a major tournament after a 55-year wait. In squares, bars, homes across the country, an explosion of euphoria.
Now we're actually in the final. I'm having to sort of reverberate it.
At times the excitement got a little out of hand. Police officers were briefly called in to restore order in this part of central London when crowds swamped a London bus. But on the whole, light-hearted scenes. In the England camp itself, an altogether calmer atmosphere. The gravity of this victory not lost on manager Gareth Southgate, though.
I've not heard this new Wembley like that ever, and to be able to share that with everybody and share it with everybody at home is very special.
In the cool light of day, focus is quickly turning to the final against Italy.
So it's the biggest possible test we could have with a day less to recover, but we've got to prepare from now, and of course it's wonderful to have that opportunity to take them on.
England will be hoping that Sunday brings more scenes like this.
Guys, sadly not all positive for England. The beautiful game marred at times by some rather ugly incidents. UEFA have charged them over several incidents during that game with Denmark.
Yeah, UEFA have charged England with causing a disturbance during the national anthem for Denmark before the game. Now, this is something we've seen from some England fans in previous games during this competition, not just for opposing sides, but while their own side were taking the knee in opposition to racial injustice, some boos towards their own team as well. So clearly UEFA is trying to see if it can put a stop to those kind of incidents before Sunday's final. They're also looking into a laser beam being shone into the eyes of the Danish goalkeeper, Kasper Schmeichel, moments before he went on to save Harry Kane's initial penalty during extra time in that match. Now, through its successes, this is an England side that has managed to project a pretty powerful image of what it is to be progressively patriotic in a post-Brexit Britain, an image that obviously transcends sport. Clearly, though, there are some sections of the English support base still whose views and actions are very much at odds with that kind of modern image.
Guy Henderson in Wembley, thank you very much.
Former South African President Jacob Zuma has spent his first night in prison. The disgraced politician handed himself over to police on Wednesday. Zuma is serving 15 months for contempt of court after he failed to appear before an inquiry into state corruption. But South Africa's Justice Minister says he'll be eligible for parole in months. Andrew Derkele reports.
From president to prisoner, a remarkable fall from grace for a veteran of the struggle for democracy in South Africa. As police descended on his compound ahead of a midnight deadline for his arrest, Jacob Zuma was rushed out of his homestead to hand himself over. A night of drama that gripped a nation, ending in a last-minute surrender. His supporters had vowed to block his arrest, but in the end they didn't have to. One of his daughters tweeted Zuma was in high spirits, saying he hoped they still had the same overalls from Robben Island, where he was jailed along with Nelson Mandela and other political prisoners in the 1960s. Zuma is the most senior politician to be jailed in post-apartheid South Africa. The country's highest court sentenced him to 15 months in prison last month for refusing to appear before a corruption inquiry. Damning evidence has emerged of bribery and wrongdoing during Zuma's presidency. The 79-year-old testified briefly but walked out and failed to return to respond to the allegations. Zuma faces a separate court case relating to a $2 billion arms deal in 1999 when he was deputy president. He maintains he's the victim of a political witch hunt. Andrew Derkele, CGTN.
Authorities in Haiti claim to have shot dead 4 suspects believed to be behind the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. Police say the men were shot after a gun battle at a house in the capital Port-au-Prince, while 2 others have been detained. A search is underway for other possible accomplices. President Moïse was gunned down at his home on Wednesday.
Meanwhile, neighbouring Dominican Republic has closed its borders with Haiti amid fears of a mass outflow of migrants. Only Dominican nationals are being allowed to return as security is increased at the island's 4 border checkpoints. Military leaders in Santo Domingo say Haiti is now in chaos with the risk of a stampede by Haitian citizens trying to escape.
Officials have called off the search for survivors of the Miami building collapse. Rescuers say there's no chance of life. 60 bodies have been recovered, but 80 people are still missing. A large section of the apartment block collapsed 2 weeks ago.
Afghan government forces have taken back control of a western provincial capital which was seized by the Taliban on Wednesday. The Defence Ministry says hundreds of troops have now been deployed to the region. Fighting is continuing in the capital of Baghuz province on the Turkmenistan border.
The extreme heat that roasted the Pacific Northwest and Western Canada could never have happened without climate change, according to a recent study. Temperatures of nearly 50 degrees Celsius were recorded last week. A team of international scientists found that this would have been impossible in the past, but it's likely to become more common.
Australia's largest city, Sydney, has reported its biggest daily rise in COVID cases this year, despite being in lockdown. The state government reported 38 cases, pushing the total to more than 370. Authorities, who are trying to curb the spread of the Delta variant, say people have been breaking the rules by going to others' households. The city's population of 5 million people have been told to stay at home until the 17th of July.
The pandemic has allowed criminal gangs to take advantage of many more people through forced labour, sexual exploitation and the grooming of children, just some of the crimes that make up human trafficking. That's the conclusion of a report from the UN's Office on Drugs and Crime. Ilias Chatsis from the UN said the pandemic had forced many groups trying to help to scale down their operations.
Crime always adapts and mutates, and is always very fast to take advantage of crisis and of circumstances that allow it to flourish. We've seen it in all kinds of crises. We have been from the beginning warning about the effects of the pandemic, as it inevitably affects the most vulnerable of groups in our society that are actually the most vulnerable also to trafficking in persons. So from the beginning, we have issued warnings about the effect that it could have on children, on women, the levels of violence and abuse, and also of the capacity of state systems and non-governmental organizations to provide services during the pandemic. So it's not a problem only for the developing world or for the developed countries, it's a problem that affects us all. It has different manifestations in different parts of the world. For example, if we're talking about Western Europe, it affects mostly women for sexual exploitation. If we're talking about Africa, it affects children, among others, for forced begging. If we're talking for Asia, trafficking for forced labor is the most prevalent form.
People have been spending increasing amounts of time online during this pandemic. How has that affected traffickers' behaviour?
Online sexual exploitation is a key element, unfortunately, of trafficking in persons, even under normal circumstances. So it's an area that we need to look more into to see how we can fight it. At the times of the pandemic, the situation has been exacerbated. We had children, but also people in general spending very long hours in front of the computers, being exposed to dangers and to influences that before were easier to control. In a way, especially this relates to children, as we have seen child sexual exploitation really increasing during the pandemic. In some parts of the world, it has actually doubled during the period of the pandemic.
So for those people trying to tackle human trafficking, how has the pandemic affected their work?
Like in every other government service, if you like, or social services, the pandemic at the beginning grinded these services to a halt. And this had a devastating effect on services for trafficking victims. It has social services have stopped, counseling services have stopped. Some countries tried to go online, but it was very difficult because victims did not have access to computers or did not have enough training. Justice system stopped. It was very difficult to process cases. Some of the victims were left with their residency permits expired. Residence permits expired, and they didn't have also work permits or the capacity to extend them. Some victims have been stranded on the wrong side of the border, not been able to return home. Others had to stay in third countries in shelter for months in confinement during the pandemic. So it has been a very, very difficult situation to address.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, pictures at an exhibition. Shanghai opens a world-class art space, and we'll have a sneak preview.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London. China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. French government ministers are due to visit the Champagne region for urgent meetings with wine producers.
It comes after a decision by Moscow to order non-Russian producers to label their bottles as sparkling wine and not champagne. Ross Cullen reports.
The rolling vineyards of the idyllic countryside of eastern France. Not perhaps the kind of place you might expect to find at the centre of an international row, but a diplomatic debate has been sparked by sparkling wine. This is Champagne. It's home to the famous wine, and for a wine to be 100% considered champagne, it can only come from this part of eastern France and nowhere else in the world. It's protected by the designation AOC, or Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée, or Appellation of Controlled Origin in English. And that means that producers have exclusivity over the use of the word champagne. But Russia has just brought in a new law forbidding the use of the word champagne, or champanskaya in Russian, on imported bottles. And Russia imports about 50 million litres of sparkling wine each year, and French champagne accounts for about 13% of that total. And speaking to the head of the Champagne Committee in this part of eastern France, he says that producers were shocked by this sudden announcement and are scrambling to try to resolve the dispute. It could end up at the World Trade Organization if Paris and Moscow don't manage to come up with a bilateral agreement. Now, Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, wants to support the local wine industry, but producers here say it's an attack on what should be a protected heritage product. Now, the French Foreign Minister has also weighed in, criticising this move by Moscow. Local wine producers in this part of France are already in discussion with the Russian authorities, and we expect more French government ministers to come to this region on Friday for urgent talks. Ross Cullen, CGTN, in the Champagne region of France.
The pandemic has led to a boom for natural medicines and herbs across Europe. Harvesting season is underway in Albania, where the native cornflowers are claimed to boost immunity. Exports are up around a fifth on this time last year. And to find out more, europe.cgtn.com.
Shanghai has opened a new world-class museum with exhibitions featuring some of the best works of art on Earth. CGTN's Lin Lin reports.
Located between the Pearl Tower and the Shanghai New International Expo Center, the Museum of Art in Pudong is a landmark in Shanghai Lujiazui's core waterfront area. The museum, which creates a subtle blend of light, art, and image, is the latest work of renowned French architect Jean Nouvel. The inaugural exhibitions include works by one of China's most celebrated contemporary artists, Cai Guoqiang. From flying saucers to aliens and astronauts, Cai illuminates the museum with his light sculptures.
This venue is a place in time in which civilization from the past, present, and the future intersect. So this cosmic-themed exhibition can't be more fitting.
The new museum also features masterpieces from Tate, the UK's long-running art institution. Pre-Raphaelite fans will get an up-close opportunity to check out Sir John Everett Millie's masterpiece, Ophelia, and works by contemporary artists in the UK. Another exhibition opening in the museum features works by Spanish painter, sculptor, and ceramicist Juan Miró.
We want to create an experience-based art museum in which visitors of all ages can find something they enjoy here.
The Museum of Art in Pudong provides Shanghai with yet another cultural landmark, and it is now in talks with some of the world's top museums to collaborate in the future. Lin Lin, CGTN.
And finally, they may be out of the Euros tournament, but how's this for consolation? Denmark still has something to celebrate. The country has just unveiled the world's tallest sandcastle. At just over 21 metres, it's 3 metres taller than the previous record holder from Germany. The sand is mixed with clay, so it holds together better, and it's shaped like a triangle, so it doesn't collapse. The castle's decorated with local features like wind and kite surfing, fish and lighthouses, and it'll be on display until winter.
The headlines again. The European Parliament votes overwhelmingly to condemn Hungary's controversial new law banning the depiction or promotion of homosexuality in schools.
The automaker Stellantis accelerates towards electric vehicles, announcing a $35 billion investment.
And spectators are barred from the Tokyo Olympics as the city declares a coronavirus emergency.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.